The director's voice cracked across the set like a bullwhip. "You're done. I don't want to see you here tomorrow." 50 crew members went silent. The lighting technician swallowed once, nodded, and stayed at his board. Because what else do you do when your career ends in front of everyone you've worked with for 6 weeks? But wait, because Gary Cooper was watching from his mark, and in the next 4 takes, he was going to do something that nobody on that set would understand until it was over. October 1953, a frontier town set built on a ranch 30 miles outside Tucson. The production was called Sunset Territory, a mid-budget Western that had been plagued by problems since day one. Bad weather, budget overruns, a leading lady who'd come down with pneumonia in week 3, and now, on night 27, a director who was 2 hours behind schedule, sweating through his shirt and looking for someone to blame. The director's name was Martin Vance, 46 years old, 3 modest hits behind him, a reputation for visual precision that bordered on obsession. He'd built his career on images, on frames that looked like paintings, on lighting that critics called sculptural. When something went wrong with an image, it went wrong with Martin Vance personally. The lighting technician's name was Edgar Marsh, 52 years old, 28 years in the business, hands that had shaped light on more pictures than most people in that desert had ever seen. He was head of the electrical department on Sunset Territory, responsible for every lamp, every gel, every shadow that fell across the frame. And 3 minutes ago, resetting between takes in the chaos of a night shoot running overtime, he'd nudged one of the big units a few degrees off its mark. Notice what that mistake looked like on the monitor, because it's the hinge the whole story swings on. The shot was a confrontation scene, Cooper's character facing down a gambler on the wooden sidewalk outside a saloon. The lighting plan called for even coverage, dramatic but controlled, the kind of setup that let the actors' faces read clearly against the period backdrop. What Edgar's adjustment created was something else entirely. A streak of hard light cut across Cooper's face at an angle nobody had planned, carving his features into planes of shadow and gold. Half the saloon front disappeared into darkness, the careful production design swallowed by black. On the monitor, it looked wrong. It looked broken. It looked like someone had made a mistake. Martin Vance saw the playback and something inside him snapped. "What the hell is this?" He was already moving toward the lighting rig, his voice climbing. "Who touched my lights? Who moved my goddamn lights?" Edgar stepped forward. "That was me, Mr. Vance. During the reset, I was adjusting for the wind, and I must have what? Must have destroyed 3 hours of setup. Must have thrown away the entire visual plan for this sequence. It was an accident. I can fix it in 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Vance laughed, but there was no humor in it. We're 2 hours over. The studio's called twice. I've got 50 people standing here burning money while you play with my lights like a first-year grip who doesn't know which end of a lamp gets hot. The crew had frozen. This was the silence that falls when everyone knows something terrible is happening and no one can stop it. You're done. Vance's voice dropped to something almost quiet, which was somehow worse than the shouting. I don't want to see you here tomorrow. Pack your kit after we wrap and don't come back. Edgar Marsh stood there for a moment. 28 years in the business, a wife at home, a mortgage, a reputation that had taken 3 decades to build and had just been demolished in front of 50 witnesses. He nodded once. Yes, sir. And he went back to his board because the shot still needed to be lit, and he was still, technically, employed until wrap. Listen to what Gary Cooper did in the next 45 seconds, because it's what he didn't do that matters. He didn't step in, didn't defend Edgar, didn't pull rank or make demands or deliver any of the speeches that movie stars are supposed to deliver when injustice happens in front of them. He just stood on his mark, watching. His face showed nothing. He might have been thinking about the scene, about his lines, about what he was going to have for dinner. Impossible to tell. The assistant director called for positions. The camera operator made adjustments. Someone from the sound department checked levels. Quiet on set. The slate clapped in front of Cooper's face. Action! Cooper stepped forward to deliver his first line and missed his mark by a full step. His face drifted out of the key light. The framing, carefully calculated to catch both actors in a two-shot, was completely wrong. Cut! Vance's voice was tight. Gary, you missed your mark. Did I? Cooper looked down at the tape on the ground, then back at the director. Sorry, Martin, let's go again. They reset. Second take. Action. This time Cooper hit his mark perfectly. He opened his mouth to deliver his line and spoke half a beat early, stepping directly on his co-star's dialogue, creating an overlap that made the audio unusable. Cut. Vance was staring at the monitor, confusion starting to mix with his anger. Gary, you came in early. You stepped on Frank's line. My fault. Cooper's expression was apologetic. Timing's off tonight. One more. Third take. Action. Cooper moved forward, hit his mark, waited for his cue, opened his mouth, and his revolver slipped from its holster, clattering against the wooden sidewalk with a sound that echoed across the silent set. Cut! Vance was sweating now, despite the cool desert night. What the hell is happening? Gary, your gun. Holster must be loose. Cooper bent to pick up the weapon, taking his time, examining it with what appeared to be genuine concern. Someone should check this safety issue. The prop master rushed over. The holster was fine. Everyone knew the holster was fine, but now they were burning more time, more money, more of the studio's patience. Vance stood by the monitor, watching the clock, watching his career tick away with every unusable take. 3 shots ruined. 3 perfect setups wasted. And Gary Cooper, who never missed marks, who was famous for getting scenes in 1 or 2 takes, who had been hitting his cues for 30 years, was suddenly performing like an amateur. Remember what was on that monitor because Vance was about to see it differently. He called for playback, all 3 takes back to back. He watched them in silence, trying to understand what was going wrong, trying to find the technical problem that was sabotaging his shoot. And then he watched them again. Slower this time. On the 3rd viewing, something shifted in his face. The light, the wrong light. The mistake that Edgar Marsh had made and been fired for. It was extraordinary. The hard beam cutting across Cooper's face didn't destroy the image. It transformed it. The planes of shadow and gold turned a generic Western confrontation into something that looked like a Rembrandt painting. The saloon front, half lost in darkness, wasn't flat anymore. It was dangerous. It was atmospheric. It was exactly the kind of image that Martin Vance had built his career chasing, and it had happened by accident, and he'd fired the man who created it. Vance looked up from the monitor. Across the set, Edgar Marsh was still standing at his lighting board, waiting for someone to tell him to power down. His face was carefully blank, but his hands were gripping the controls hard enough that his knuckles showed white. Beyond him, Gary Cooper stood on his mark, examining his revolver with the patient attention of a man who had all the time in the world. Their eyes met, just for a moment. Cooper's expression didn't change, but something passed between them that Vance couldn't quite read. And Martin Vance understood. Not all of it. Not the full scope of what had just happened. But enough. Enough to know that 3 ruined takes weren't accidents. Enough to know that the biggest star on his production had just burned his own performance, deliberately, systematically, in a way that forced Vance to keep looking at the footage instead of moving on, forced him to see what he'd missed the first time. The set was still silent. 50 people waiting to find out what happened next. Vance's voice came out quiet, stripped of the rage that had been there 20 minutes ago. "Nobody touches those lights." A murmur ran through the crew. Edgar Marsh's hands loosened on the board, just slightly. "And you," Vance was looking at Edgar now, "be here tomorrow at call. Same position. We're not changing anything." Edgar nodded. His voice was steady, but something in his eyes had cracked. "Yes, sir." Vance turned back to the monitor, staring at the frozen frame of Gary Cooper's face carved in shadow and gold. "Let's go again. Same setup. Gary, whenever you're ready." "Ready now, Martin." The fourth take was perfect. Cooper hit every mark, nailed every line, gave a performance that would end up in the film's trailer. And the light, the wrong light, made it look like something from another era, from a time when films were art and not product. Nobody mentioned the earlier outburst. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. But something changed on that set, in the way people looked at Gary Cooper when they thought he wasn't watching. Something between gratitude and awe, the expression of people who had witnessed a kind of magic they couldn't quite explain. Here's what Edgar Marsh understood that night, standing at his board while take after take fell apart in front of him. He understood that Gary Cooper was burning his own performance, burning his own reputation for reliability, burning the goodwill he'd built with this director over 3 pictures, burning it all, systematically, in a way that couldn't be traced back to him, because who accuses Gary Cooper of missing marks on purpose? Who believes that the most professional actor in Hollywood would deliberately sabotage his own scenes? And he understood why. Because Cooper couldn't defend him out loud, couldn't step between him and Vance and say, "You're wrong, the man stays." That would have humiliated Vance in front of his crew, turned a recoverable situation into a war. Directors don't forget when stars undercut their authority publicly. That kind of confrontation ends relationships, ends productions, ends careers. So Cooper found another way. He made the footage unwatchable, not because of the light, but because of his own mistakes. He forced Vance to keep reviewing, keep looking, keep staring at the same images until he saw what was actually there instead of what he expected to see. He turned a firing into a discovery. He turned a mistake into a masterpiece. And he did it without ever saying a word that could be quoted, without ever making a demand that could be refused. The scene ended up in cinematography textbooks. It's still there in courses on lighting design and visual storytelling. Professors show the frame, Cooper's face split by shadow, the saloon front dissolving into darkness, and talk about bold, expressionistic choices and the courage to break conventional coverage. They don't know the story. They don't know that the bold choice was an accident made by a 52-year-old technician whose hands were shaking because he'd just been fired. They don't know that the expressionistic look only survived because the star of the picture quietly destroyed 3 takes to buy time for a director's anger to cool. What they know is the image, and the image is undeniable. Edgar Marsh worked another 12 years after Sunset Territory. He never reached the top of his field, never shot a picture himself, never got the recognition that comes with having your name above the title. But he worked steadily, respectably, on productions that valued what he could do with light. In 1965, he gave a guest lecture at UCLA's film school. A student asked him about Sunset Territory, about the famous saloon scene, about how he'd achieved that look. Edgar was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't achieve it," he said finally. "I made a mistake, nudged a light in the wrong direction during a reset. The director fired me on the spot, in front of everyone." The students shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the story they'd expected. But Gary Cooper was there, and over the next 4 takes, he missed every mark, dropped every cue, fumbled every piece of business he'd been doing perfectly for 30 years. Edgar smiled, but there was something complicated in it. He never defended me out loud, never said a word to the director about keeping me on. He just ruined take after take until the only thing left to blame was how good the light looked. "Why?" the student asked. "Why would he do that?" Edgar thought about it. Because sometimes you can't fight directly. Sometimes the only way to save someone is to make their mistake look like genius. Cooper understood that. He was willing to burn his own performance, his own reputation, to give a director time to see what was actually in front of him. He paused. That's not something they teach you in film school. That's something you learn from watching someone do it. And if you're lucky, really lucky, you get to be the person they do it for. Look at what the story asks of anyone who hears it. Not whether you'd miss your marks to save a stranger. That's a question about bravery, and bravery is easy to imagine from a distance. The real question is subtler. When you see someone being destroyed unfairly, do you understand that the direct defense might make things worse? That public confrontation can harden positions instead of changing them. That sometimes the only way to save someone is to sacrifice something of your own, quietly, in a way they might never fully understand. Gary Cooper never told Edgar Marsh what he was doing, never explained, never took credit, never said, "I ruined those takes for you." He just did it and let Edgar draw his own conclusions, and went back to being the most reliable actor on the set. That's a kind of courage that doesn't show up in speeches or confrontations. It's the courage to be misunderstood, the courage to look incompetent, the courage to let your own work suffer so that someone else's career can survive. The saloon scene is still beautiful. It's still in textbooks, still shown to students, still praised for its innovative lighting design. And somewhere underneath all that praise, invisible to everyone who watches it, is a different story. A man made a mistake. Another man lost his temper, and a third man who could have done nothing chose to do something that cost him the only thing he had to give. His own perfect takes sacrificed one by one until the mistake became a miracle. That's not how the textbooks tell it, but that's how it happened. And every time someone watches that scene and wonders how they achieved that look, the answer is standing right there in the frame. A man who understood that sometimes the best performance you can give is the one you're willing to destroy. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. This is a dramatized story inspired by real people and events. Specific dialogue, scenes, and side characters are creative reconstruction for storytelling purposes.